Let me start with Miley Cyrus. Back in 2013, she performed at the MTV Video Music Awards. She twerked. It was huge. CNN published a story about that, placed it prominently on their website. It was the story with the highest traffic at the CNN that day. This case was widely discussed by many journalists. Should a story like this beat out articles on, say, climate change, just for the traffic? This was 8 years ago. I know many things have changed, but still, the Mileys remain. I think this story encapsulates every prejudice journalists may secretly have about metrics. That we are chasing numbers and betraying our journalistic values. The fear that metrics will bankrupt journalistic culture. I also had doubts. I worried about ending up surrounded by dashboards and feeling more like a stockbroker than a journalist. But I think it's time to overcome this anxiety.
When I started my career in journalism, there was a lot of anxiety in the air. Journalists around me had started to worry about the power of tech giants. Personally, I was afraid that people wouldn't want to read my stories anymore, that people would rather spend their time playing Candy Crush or basically anything that doesn't require a long attention span. I didn't become a journalist to do breaking news headlines. I became a journalist to touch and move people with stories. So I ended up working as a lifestyle editor, as specialized in long-form narratives. But I also knew that mobile storytelling wasn't going anywhere, so I decided to embrace it and learn more. I took a step in a completely different direction and applied to work in a mobile game development startup. Suddenly, I found myself sitting at the same table with coders, and I didn't have a clue what they were talking about. I remember thinking to myself, what am I, a journalist, doing here? The startup language of tech was foreign to me. I was confused as to what was expected of me, but also how I would eventually bring those teachings back to the newsroom. And to be honest, for the first months, I couldn't speak their language. I didn't know how to connect the dots.
I work for Newsroom in Indonesia in a startup company called Glance. And sometimes I don't understand what I'm doing either. In fact, for the first few weeks in this fellowship, I struggled to introduce myself and explain what I do. In short, our headquarters in India built a content aggregation service on lock screen wallpaper, so users can consume news and social video before they unlock their phone. The idea is to come to the audience first, before they even open any apps. We try to grab those micro moments, those few seconds before they opening their phone. I joined this startup and built the newsroom in Jakarta 2 years ago, and I have a strong reason to do so. I share the same concern with Elizabeth and Yenny about technology because I realize not only metrics and storytelling changing, distribution is too. In fact, news online distribution has been taken over by tech giants and their platform. This is a concern because the power of news consumption is the key for business of news. What happens if journalism loses this? Distribution has become my interest, and I really want to find out how people like us with journalism background can influence technology to make it better.
I always cared about stories and describing the world. I was never good at mathematics. I hated numbers. I stared at them. And honestly, I was mainly confused. Reading time, conversion rates, click-through rates, reading time. How are these numbers connected? What do these numbers want to tell me? And how do I interpret them properly? Numbers are considered rational, but they aren't. They are emotional. Metrics evoke feelings like anxiety, self-doubt, competition, and demotivation. Rankings of the top 10 articles can lead to a toxic environment in the newsroom as well. And metrics are not like plug and play. It's not easy to understand, nor work with them.
After just about a year, I moved back to the newsroom from the mobile game team, and I started to look at storytelling from a new angle. I realized that there's a huge gap between journalism and technology. Our industry is sometimes quite slow and hesitant in adopting new technologies. Innovative storytelling can be looked down upon as gimmicky or unnecessary. When I pitch things like news games, I sometimes think, am I even considered to be a real journalist? But we have to keep reinventing ourselves if we want to survive. We need to look for the best practices from different industries and different parts of the world and keep an open mind.
Yeah, and people usually think that technological experiment always come from the West, but actually, in the global South, we have a lot to offer too, especially when it comes to mobile devices. Like many Asian and African countries, Indonesia skipped the desktop era. More than 66% of the overall web traffic come from this small device. When we think of digital, we have always meant mobile. But many people don't read news. In fact, Indonesia is dubbed as one of the least literate nations in the world. So how can we reach these people? What kind of news that is more relevant to them? And how we can fit the news in the lock screen user interface? There are important lessons to be learned.
By now, we have already debunked many of the initial fears we had around technology. People do still want to spend time with good stories. As it turns out, we do still have an attention span. Analytics show that long-form narratives actually do very well on the new platforms. Tech can push us to think about content in new ways and help us become better journalists. The capacity to tell stories on our mobile phones is almost unlimited. So one time, my newsroom wanted to make a story about privilege, or more specifically, how the environment you were born in has shaped your life. The final result was an interactive story where you, as the reader, answer a set of questions and the narrative changes accordingly, showing you how your parents' education or even the area you lived in has either made it easier or harder for you to do well in life. I think this is a good example how we can combine interactive elements and data to create really powerful stories. Formats change, but tech doesn't change the fact that we are still storytellers at heart. Our core values never went anywhere.
Our stories are the most valuable thing we have. But how good is journalism if nobody reads it? We work in a competitive and constantly changing media environment. No one can take the audience for granted. So you have to look for new ways to understand the readership if you want to keep them. High numbers of readers may say nothing about the quality of a story, but what if I tell you that you need only change the headline slightly to get thousands more readers? Or what if I tell you that publishing the article to another time with another picture will increase readership? Data is not destroying journalistic creativity. Data analytics is rather a tool for decision making. We have to see this work as a leadership task that help journalists to do great journalism. Every expert I talked to during my research at the Reuters Institute confirmed people are longing for good stories. Data shows us new paths to find our way back to our journalistic roots.
I have spent 6 months in this fellowship to find answer to what this technology means for news distribution. And I found out that new medium of distribution can be beneficial to people who have not usually engaged with news before. News on lock screen can expose the audience with different topics, views, and sources. And this is a good thing because incidental exposure can make society less fragmented. You understand more if you came across the things that you are not seeking. And we live with tech giants, but it just makes sense to keep pushing new alternative for news distribution and give small, innovative company run by local people a chance. Because in the end, the audience will have more choice to find what suits them best.
It is a balancing act. Every newsroom has to find its way between collective anxiety and tech evangelist hype. But here's the good news. Thanks to metrics, we have a clear idea of who our audience is. The people move to the center and we can reach new readers. Readers we didn't even know were interested in our stories. And journalists could use technology to make journalism with greater impact.
New technology has an elitist image, but tech has another side to it that we should talk about more. Mobile storytelling brings visuals to the forefront, and visual communication is actually a more instinctive form of communication than written text. It can cross language boundaries and culture boundaries and reach people who wouldn't be reached with traditional text stories. So it can actually have a democratizing effect.
But of course, technology won't always be the solution. It can create other issue, and too often it fails. But it will keep evolving, and more new roles in the intersection between technology and then journalism will be invented in the future. We need journalists to be in the front lines in these challenging roles, because if we cannot overcome our fear, who will?